And it's a good day and a good week. And this week, as we explore the wonder of nature, let us consider all of those amazing creatures that live on this planet. You know, many of those we've never even seen or even heard of before. You know, just think of all the millions of insects that there are around the planet. So let's open our eyes and notice all those furry and fuzzy and slimy and scaly and feathery creatures with whom we share the planet. Yeah? One of the things that brings us joy and wonder is taking time to be still, you know, to be with nature, to be fully present in the moment, and to spend time playing and laughing with our four-legged friends. I think many of us have one at home, and we love to be with them. And you know, sometimes when they pass to the next world, it's sad, and then hopefully there's a new one. But it's that wonderful time that we spend with them, and because we just forget it, all of our cares, and we're just there with them, because they're all about love, right? And just being still. You know, when I was a child, and later again as a parent, I enjoyed family trips to the zoo. And there we saw the animals of the world. You know, and one of the things that Michael and I have on our bucket list is an African photo safari. So that's, you know, one, we want to see some of these animals up front in their home habitat. Maybe you liked to watch the scaly things, those amazingly variety of colors of fishes and turtles, and there's a stingray, all these other sea creatures that swim around in an aquarium or the ocean or the river or the lake. You know, scaly iguanas crawl across the ground, and they come in all different colors, and they can change that color depending on what the background is where they're at, right? Another thing at the zoo, we would rush to see the chimpanzees. They would be swinging from tree to tree and making lots of noise, maybe being still and grooming one another. And here's a mother chimpanzee carrying her baby chimp on her back. I remember when we'd see a flock of birds taking off into the sky, and it's so majestic. You know, it just takes your breath away in some ways, just to see them rising from the ground and taking off into the sky, right? I also remember one hot, slow summer day when I was a child, and the most exciting thing going on that day was I was sitting there watching this snail slowly making its way across the sidewalk, and it left a silvery trail behind it, and it took it 2 hours to go maybe about 2 feet. But that's what its time was, and it slowed me down to that time, and I'm sure I must have been meditating in the way that children meditate at that age. So what is our relationship to the animal kingdom? You know, many churches and ministries have long tried to decide what is the appropriate relationship between nature and the animal kingdom and us. You know, I'd like to provide a few examples that were provided by David Merritt Jones. And so Dennis told everyone that the Presbyterian Church called a meeting, and they wanted to decide what to do about their squirrel infestation. So after much prayer and consideration, they concluded that the squirrels were predestined to be there, and so they shouldn't interfere with God's divine will. All right? Sounds like a church, right? All right, so at the Baptist church, the squirrels had taken interest in the baptistry, right? So the deacons met, and they decided to put a water slide into their baptistry and let the squirrels drown themselves. Okay, so the squirrels liked the slide, and unfortunately they knew instinctively how to swim, and so twice as many squirrels showed up the next week. It was a great thing. Now the Lutheran Church decided that they were not in a position to harm any of God's creatures, so they humanely tramped their squirrels, and they set them free near the Baptist church. 2 weeks later, when the Baptist took out the slide, they were all back. Now the Episcopalians tried a much more unique path by setting out pans of whiskey and around their church in an effort to kill the squirrels with alcohol poisoning. They sadly learned how much damage a band of drunk squirrels can do. But the Catholic Church came up with a much more creative strategy. They baptized all the squirrels and made them members of the church. Now they only see them at Christmas and Easter. Now, not much was heard from the Jewish synagogue. They took the first squirrel and circumcised him. They have not seen a squirrel since. Right? Now, Sharon Hudson commented that the Center for Spiritual Living had the most enlightened response. Right? Since we are inclusive, they taught the squirrels to meditate, and then they fit just right in. So more seriously, let's talk about the issue from two perspectives. Anthropocentrism and oneness of all life. Now, anthropocentrism, when you can say that, is believed by some to be the central problem in our philosophy towards the environment and living creatures. According to dictionary.com, anthropocentrism is the tendency to view and interpret everything in terms of human experience, making it the only operative consideration in determining the moral or ethical value of a course of action. The evidence that the traditional Western attitudes are systematically biased against the non-human world is all around us, right? There's books such as The Confession of an Eco-Warrior by Dave Foreman. He's one of the people that created Earth First organization. Or Green Rage, written by Christopher Maines. These environmental activists identify anthropocentrism as the underlying reason for humanity's seeming need to dominate and develop most of the earth. Now, in the creation story in Genesis 1:26, it reads, "And God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." Now, some people have taken that to mean that humans are superior to other species and that all the animals and plants exist for the sole benefit of mankind. Right? I believe there's a different interpretation. Let's look first at the statement that humans are made in the image and likeness of God. Now, that doesn't mean that God isn't made to look like us as a white man with a beard up in the heaven, right? Instead, it means that we are like God. We are co-creators with the divine. Right? Just like a king or queen rules over their kingdom, those leaders have the authority and responsibility to care for their people and not just their own interests. Right? And as co-creators, our human responsibility is to create a world that works for the animal and the plant kingdoms as well as for us. Our beliefs, our intentions, and our actions all matter. Now, when humans live as if we're superior to the animal kingdom, we make decisions that result in perhaps animal abuse that it can range from neglect to cruelty or just even malicious killing, right? Now, less immediately obvious is when we have human actions that lead to extinction of a whole species. You know, we think, you're going to kill one bird, that won't be a problem, but when you kill all of the birds in a species, they're no more. And what is the purpose of that bird in the overall diversity of life? Right? Human actions that might lead to this include clearing native habitat for urbanization. Well, we're going to build a house, and another, and another, and another, right? Or a road, or what have you. Or when we clear a field and have a monoculture of one big field of corn or rice or whatever it is, we get rid of the natural habitat. That gets rid of the plants and the animals that rely on that wildlife habitat. When we use pesticides, right? Overgrazing, overhunting, overfishing, all of them are problems. Now, according to the UN's 2019 Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the rate of species extinctions is accelerating. Currently, more than 1 million animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction, many within decades. Right? Even if people maintain an anthropocentric point of view, it's still important for humans to alter how we treat the animal kingdom. Life on the planet We are part of that. And we share DNA with the animals. There is a whole lot of overlap between our DNA and different species of animals because we all evolved from a common evolutionary source at the physical level of expression. So what threatens the environment for the animals and the plants also threatens the environment and the survival for humans. In her 1962 book, Silent Spring, marine biologist Rachel Carson called out the environmental consequences in DDT and other pesticides and the other chemicals that are used in agriculture. Not only were the bird populations dying, but the chemicals were accumulating in the soil and in the water. Humans, she pointed out, were also potentially at risk for cancer. Carson argued that humans must find a way to peacefully and sustainably coexist with nature for their own survival. This is where the Anthropocentrism actually would have the same argument as protecting the plant and animal species. Carson's book, Silent Spring, and a 1963 CBS TV special were very controversial. And she ran into a lot of problems in her work at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But the alarm had been sounded, and she stuck with it. Eventually, DDT was banned, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency was created to regulate air and water pollutants. She made a difference. She stood up for what she believed in. We have to remember that humans are linked with the rest of God's creation. Let's examine our beliefs, our misconceptions, and our biases so we can truly embrace oneness with all life, because that is the essence of who we are. So God is in everything, everyone and everything. Ernest Holmes, the founder of Science of Mind, found much inspiration and wisdom through meditating on his connection with God and with nature. In his book, Cosmic Light, he reflected, "Very frequently, I sit down all alone for 2 hours and listen to the silence, and it speaks. I look into the darkness, and it turns light. It is there, and there is no question about it. God is warmth. Spirit is colorful. The universe is filled with light. A voice speaks from everything, running brooks, stones, trees, animals and moon and stars, deserts and stillness. And you can listen to the stillness until it speaks to you." All of these experiences of listening to the stillness hold special meaning for us because they take us away from our busy world and they connect us with our inner world, the essence of life, the essence of who we are and all living creatures as part of the one life that is God. Now, as humans, we have the conscious awareness that allows us to reflect on who we are and the meaning of life. And this ability to reflect distinguishes us from the animal kingdom, or does it? There's some people that believe that dolphins and some other species may share this level of conscious awareness with us. Even so, each and every creature is an expression of that one life manifesting here on the planet. Anatole France was a prolific French novelist, poet, and journalist, somewhat irreverent. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1921. And one of his favorite quotes is, "Until one has loved an animal, a part of one's soul remains unawakened." Right? If we can experience the breath of life of the divine in every creature, perhaps every creature deserves the reverence and respect as part of the divine. It's a circle. Right? Now, the alternative to anthropocentrism is biocentrism, which dictionary.com defines as the view or principle that all life forms have inherent value and significance, or should therefore be given serious consideration in determining the moral or ethical value of a course of action. Right? So we have to look at all life, not just our own perspective, in order to make a good decision. That would make sense if we're all part of the same life. Now, in Science of Mind, we believe that the same intelligence that created the stars, galaxies, and planets also created life here on planet Earth. All of life is part of the one life that is God, and in this way, biocentrism is aligned with Science of Mind. Now, in the glossary of the 1926 version of Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes talks about different levels of consciousness. He says, when spirit manifests in a purely mechanical way, we say it is unconscious life. When it manifests in the animal world, we speak of it as simple consciousness. When it manifests in and through man or woman, we say that it is self-conscious state. Like, I think, therefore I am, as Descartes would say. And as this self-conscious state of man or woman, their mentality reaches a larger world of realization and comprehends something of its unity with its whole, we say that it is a cosmic state. Thus, we know of 4 different levels where spirit manifests: unconscious state, simple consciousness, self-consciousness, and cosmic consciousness. All are but different ways through which the one power operates, just different levels of awareness. So life then is that quality of being running through which enables anything that is to be. It's that divine consciousness that is manifesting in and through this physical expression at different levels of awareness of who we truly are. And as humans evolve their consciousness, they learn what unity really means. They go from being just that simple consciousness of moving around and, they're walking, eating, whatever, speaking to someone, to realizing that I'm here, I exist, that I'm thinking, I have thoughts, I can respond, I can choose how I respond to what's going on in my world. In fact, I can create a new intention. I can change the pattern that's always been. And when we then connect with this greater level of being, that we are one with God, that we are a part of this life, we're not separate from anything else. That is that cosmic state of oneness, right? The cosmic consciousness, the Christ consciousness, as some call it. Now, Anthony Douglas Williams is a Canadian spiritualist, writer, and animal rights activist. He was born in 1953, so he's still alive. And he said, when I look into the eyes of an animal, I do not see an animal. I see a living being. I see a friend. I feel a soul. He also said, one day we will know that all animals have a soul. Hopefully this knowledge does not come when it's too late. Right? Now, there is an interdependent of humans and animals and insects. Now, yesterday, August 21st, was National Honeybee Day. And today's reading provided some perspective on why bees are important. From the bees' point of view, what was their purpose? Was it to protect the hive? Was it to gather food for their colony? To humans, the most important part of bees is that they produce honey to sweeten tea or bread, or baklava is my favorite, right? And then but from nature and spirit's purpose for the bees, it's as a pollinator, right? They pollinate the fruits and the flowers and the plants and all of life. According to the USDA, Department of Agriculture, beginning in 2006, honeybee colonies have been rapidly declining. From spring of 2020 to the spring of 2021, beekeepers lost 40% of their colonies. That's amazing. It takes them a lot. Each year they replace the colonies, but it takes a lot of work to create that many new colonies. I mean, naturally, there's more like 10 or 15% would die off in a year because of the queen ages or what have you. They have a life cycle. But 45%, 46% is a lot. And so the bees are being severely impacted by pesticides, by pests such as mites that can get into their colony. Loss of habitat is a big one. Inadequate nutrition, climate change. Beekeepers have been carefully modifying their bee management practices so they can replace the lost colonies, but it is a difficult process. Now, also according to the USDA, 80% of the 1,400 different cultivated crops that are grown around the world require pollination to reproduce, to have next year's crop, to have new seeds, or to produce the fruit, even if you're creating an orange on a tree or an almond. And 30% of all of the food, or 1 out of every 3 bites, requires pollination. And this is also true about the plants that provide beverages, medicines, condiments, spices, and even fabric. They all require pollination. Now, Michael and I have been continuing to watch the show The Green Planet on PBS, and we watched an episode called Human Worlds. And the narrator, David Attenborough, discussed the close relationship between humans and animals. He says, essentially, there's a bargain between people and the plants that we've chosen for our food crops. Now, in return for eating their seeds and fruit, you'd think maybe that wasn't so great for the plants, but in fact, the people respond by curing their illnesses, whatever it is. They poison their predators, the bugs that are eating them. They keep them well watered, and they eliminate their competitors by creating monocultures, right? Now, here's a slide that shows in the Central Valley of California, that on the left is a picture of a large almond orchard. And the largest orchard in the world has 1 million acres of almonds. That's 140 million trees, each with 20 flowers per tree, for 2.8 trillion flowers in that one orchard. Now, the beekeepers, in order to pollinate all of those trees, they bring in 40 billion bees for this one orchard for just a few weeks when the trees are flowering, right? And so during that 2 weeks, the bees are very busy. They're visiting all of the blooms, and they can get to, 1,000 blooms each day, each bee. But what do the bees do when the plants are through blooming? Now, the plants, about 2.5 trillion flowers are pollinated, and that's going to create 2.5 trillion almonds. So the trees are happy. The farmer's very happy. But what about the bees? Where do they go? Well, that's one reason that the beekeepers keep them in these little hives that they move from farm to farm, so they can continue having food for their bees to eat. But they're starting to think of what happens in nature, in the wild. How do bees survive? And so if you look on the right, you'll see that in between the trees, there's a strip of green. And the reason that strip is there is that it's planted with different types of ground cover that bloom. So there might be clover that's blooming, or maybe there's mustard plants that are there, and they bloom at different times. They choose a nice mixture. And so the bees, when they're through with the almonds, they can go feed with the mustard, or with the clover, or whatever plant that is there. So it gives them a longer season when they've actually got food, and it also gives them a wider variety of food and nectar. So it's much healthier for their colony. Another issue when we look at animals is about half of all the arable land on the earth is used for agriculture, right? So it's not in that wild state. 80% of the cultivated land is used to produce food for livestock. It's not for the plants that we're going to eat as humans. It's for the livestock to eat, so we can eat the livestock, right? Now, the plants can produce the same amount of protein with much less acreage, much more efficient. So if we switch to more plant-based protein, we could decrease the land that's needed for agriculture, and we could actually increase the amount of land worldwide that's available for natural habitat. Not only would that be good for the plants and the habitat, but that means all of these species of insects and animals that depend on that also get to increase. Excuse me. Some of the most intelligent mammals on Earth are whales and dolphins. In the wild, whales and dolphins, they often live in groups in tight family units that may last for years or a lifetime. And they can travel up to 100 miles a day as they search for food, and they socialize. They play together. You've seen a pod of dolphins. And these intelligent animals normally spend only 10 or 20% of their time at the surface, and the rest of the time they're below and they're together. Understanding this, imagine the tragedy of a lifetime spent in a tiny swimming pool and aquarium all by yourself, or maybe with one other dolphin. Or, and so these social and perhaps conscious animals, they're often forced to live miserably in solitary confinement. Does any of you see the movie Free Willy? And so that was a great movie. It was really heartwarming, and about the boy and they wanted to get this caged animal and free and put him out in the wild. Now, what happened to Willie in real life is that he was eventually put out into the wild, but he wasn't prepared to survive there. He didn't know how to survive. He wasn't able to socialize. He didn't grow up with his family. He had been removed. And so even though they tried to help him adapt, eventually he passed away within less than a year or two after he was released. They've done the same thing. There was a lot of chimpanzees that have been raised with people, and because they're so intelligent, they've taught them to talk and with little sign symbols or sign language and things like that. But again, when they released them, there was an island somewhere in Africa where they had a group of chimpanzees that they were releasing them, and they would put them in a cage first and let them acclimate to the climate and acclimate to the types of foods that were there. And there was one woman that she went to drop them off, and she saw that not only was the chimp sad that she was leaving and not having the humans around, but she really didn't know how to survive in the wild. And so she spent almost 2 years there trying to teach the chimps how to eat. And they were getting along, and they started making friends with some of the wild chimpanzees that were there, and they would go out during the day, and they would come back to the safety of their cage. This was a big cage at night. And and so she knew that she had to leave eventually and let her favorite chimp survive on her own. And so it was with great trepidation she left. And she came back in a month, and the chimpanzee came to see her, and she was so glad. It was a great thing. She stayed for a few days, and then she left again. And when she came back the next time, she'd passed away. She didn't know how to survive. And she also trusted humans too much. So poachers had killed her. Right? So it's something where when we take them out of their natural environment, these animals, we have a responsibility. And it's kind of a catch-22. What is the most humane thing to do for them? Right? We have to be really careful of what our role is, what our relationship is with these precious creatures that are divine creations. So as we want to be committed to living in oneness and restoring and maintaining the natural habitat for all of God's creatures and living in harmony with nature, we want to work with the plants and animals to make the world a little greener, a little wilder. The planet is awakening, and we are being called upon to raise our own consciousness. If we're willing to make a change, we must be willing to face the facts and examine them with a willingness to understand and feel. And then we can take action where and how we feel called. There was a former cattle farmer in Africa that decided he was going to change his farm back into a natural habitat because it was barren and a lot of erosion. All these things were going on, and it took 10 years. They had to clear all the non-natives there, replanted. They planted trees one by one from seedlings. They didn't do anything else, but within 10 years, the whole area was back into the natural habitat. It was covered with trees and all other kinds of plants. And the animals started moving back in. First the insects, and slowly bigger and bigger and bigger. And after 10 years, they had the first puma come and the first wolf, native wolf. So it can happen. This is something that's part of it. And so we have to decide what future we want. There are many ways to make a difference. So decide in your life, what are you called to do? You can give love to the family pet, adopt an animal from a shelter, support animal and habitat conservation around the world, explore animal activism, adopt veganism, or just eat less meat, right? Be curious, educate yourself, and see how you are called to act. Let's take this to prayer. So as we go within, we know that there is one power, one presence, one life that is expressing itself in and through everyone and everything that is present on this planet and throughout the universe, the infinite universe. We see only what is right before our eyes with our human eyes. But with our spiritual eyes, we see the whole of the divine. We see the divine within each and every creature that is on this planet. We feel it in the species and the animals that we have yet to meet. And we feel that sense of oneness when we meditate and feel that cosmic consciousness of connection and feel that vibrancy of life everywhere present. The power and presence of God. And this is the truth of who we are. And so we allow ourselves to step up, to open our hearts and minds to see from this greater vision. And we listen. We take the time to be still and listen. What is ours to do? What are we called to do? What are we called to release? What are we called to embrace? How are we called to work together to lift up the expression of life on this planet to greater and higher levels of being, of expressing the oneness? And as we do, we feel that sense of healingness, of healing, of oneness, of stillness, of knowing that we are in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing with the right support, together with all of life, with all of spirit, and all of its wonderful forms. I am so grateful to know this truth, to experience it, to be a part of this healing of the planet in all ways. And I release this word knowing that it is already done. It is unfolding right here and right now. And together we say, and so it is.
It is.